Wisp Sports Radio, the voice of women in sport.
Hello, you're listening to Transcending Sport on Wisp Sports, where we believe women in sport deserve equal coverage. I'm Chris Stafford, and this is the show where we hear from organisations and individuals who are promoting sport for girls and women with all kinds of initiatives and activities. And we also cover the topics that affect women in sport everywhere. My guest today is Melissa Otterbein, who is a research student and advocate for sustainability in sport. Melissa explains how organisations and individuals in sport can play an environmental role and why sport has that responsibility. Melissa is a graduate assistant and Master of Public Health in Physical Activity, a candidate at the George Washington University Milken Institute School of Public Health, Department of Exercise and Nutrition Sciences. She is currently researching sport as a tool to advance the Sustainable Development Goals and youth retention in sport. She teaches group exercise classes while also coaching as a certified USA Triathlon coach and US Masters swimming coach. Melissa, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
Well, we've talked before about the topics that you're passionate about here with sustainability and those three golden words, really, in your vocabulary: Sustainable Development Goals. So we want to unpack this, obviously, a little bit more than we have done in the past and explain to our listeners exactly what this involves and why sport is playing such an important role in sustainability in today's world. But let's start with a little bit of your background. Tell everybody where you came from to the place you are now being passionate about this.
Absolutely. So I grew up swimming, and that was my sport of choice. And sports and swimming really became my social support network. I grew up in a home where there was addiction, and I used to say, no one can tell if you're crying behind your goggles. And so I quickly realized at a young age that sport could really not only help us address our own individual resiliency and build our own leadership skills, but also be a form of healing and empowerment. So I continued swimming, and also in my family, I grew up with a sister who had Down syndrome, and she participated in Special Olympics. And so I quickly saw how inclusion of all people in sport really also contributed to the development of a social support system for individuals and families. So after I continued to swim in college, and after graduating college, got into triathlons and started taking some public health coursework while I was working in HIV and AIDS. And I started writing a refugee healthcare paper on sport as a tool for refugee empowerment, and came across a quote that really stood out to me as why I wanted to start pursuing more with Sustainable Development Goals. At the time, this was 2012, we were in the era of the Millennium Development Goals, which we can also discuss later. But this quote said, "Do not think you are doing good by sending knitting, sewing, and basket weaving materials down here for the girls. When they sit quietly and sew, they remember the horrors that made them refugees. They do not need sewing now. They desperately need the joyful therapy that only group sports and play can bring. It transports them to a normal world. It helps them forget. It heals. Please don't forget the girls." And this was a delegate speaking to IOC delegates at the Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya, which is one of the world's longest standing refugee camps. And so this really imbued me to continue to pursue sport as an avenue for social change. And I worked for a year with a nonprofit here in Washington, D.C., where I currently live, using sports-based HIV and AIDS education, using college athletes to deliver HIV and AIDS education as well as sexual health education. I then spent some time volunteering abroad in Greece and with a community in Western Africa, focused on sport with refugees and also sport as a community building tool. So now I'm at George Washington University, where I'm finishing up my master's in public health in the physical activity program and working in the exercise science department and doing some research on sport and the sustainable development goals.
So I'm curious then what your next goal would be personally once you graduate.
Yeah, so after I graduate, I'm interested in continuing to do some research related to physical activity as a tool to address non-communicable disease prevention, and also as a tool for creating peace building and social development, particularly within youth. So there's a field called sports-based youth development. So I'm looking into working for some programs that do that kind of work, and also interested in continuing working with people who have different abilities, because my sister was a key integral person in my life to show me the power of what happens when sport is available for all.
Absolutely. And we know the benefits there across all sectors of life and community. And of course, from able-bodied to disabled-bodied people as well. And it's a wonderful therapy. But the underlining voice, I suppose, amongst all of this is the need for a sustainable environment for all of us to enjoy sport. And that's where you seem to be very passionate about this and why it is so important for everyone in sport to take this on, Melissa.
Absolutely. So the Sustainable Development Goals, to share some background for any listener who may not be as aware, were established by the United Nations in 2015, and they were created to be the 15-year framework through 2030 to, quote, spare no effort to free our fellow men, women, and children from the abject and dehumanizing conditions of extreme poverty. And these came off of the Millennium Development Goals, which were the 2000 through 2015 goals. And they had 8 primary goals, which focused largely upon creating universal education, empowering women and children, and reducing child mortality, combating HIV and AIDS and disease. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals now have a bit stronger focus on the planet and sustainability of the planet, but also how it impacts people, especially developing countries. Climate change is much more substantial when we look at how food is accessed and the effects of desertification on land, especially in developing countries where farmland may be harder to grow, and fruits and vegetables. It also looks at inclusion as a key theme. So how can we be inclusive in our work environments and our school environments? And I would propose sport environments to make sure that all people in the society have equal opportunities. And it also does continue to focus on health aspects. So the prevention of non-communicable diseases is a strong focus as well, which sport can greatly contribute to.
Let's focus on the sport element then, and where that contribution continues from your perspective now, given the base of this, the history behind this, and why we've got to the point where we have now, and we are making sport accountable in all its forms. There are so many ways in which athletes, coaches, everyone involved in sports, right through to the fan base, can contribute to this sustainable message now. So let's unpack that a little bit, Melissa.
Absolutely. So to start with, when the UN declaration of the SDGs were signed in 2015, it specifically affirmed sport as an enabler of sustainable development. So we have, even at the UN level, a recognition that sport can and does play a role in executing these 17 goals. And so there's certain groups that have started to take the lead on that. There's also been some frameworks established by the UN and the IOC One such framework is called the Sports for Climate Action Framework, which calls on the sport world, including federations, leagues, and clubs, to develop a climate agenda for sports, adhering to the principles of promoting greater environmental responsibility, reducing overall climate impact, educating for climate action, promoting sustainable and responsible consumption, and advocating for climate change through communication. And also, the Council for Responsible Sport has started to issue sustainability certifications similar to the LEED model that folks may be aware of, in which organizations can apply to be certified as a leader in their sports venue, and by showing that their communication, planning, procurement of supplies, resource management, access and equity to the venue or the sporting event, and community legacy are all done in a very sustainable manner. So given the fact that sport is a huge industry, globally, 2011 research reported that the sports industry is estimated at 480 to 620 billion. There's a large market of audiences. That's fan engagement, that's employees, that's the broader public who may be interested or catching commercials for the next sporting event in their community or town. We see that it's a large sector, and therefore it can have a vast influence of public perception and opinion. So if the sports industry can take a stand for being a leader in sustainability by incorporating the SDGs into action, then we can begin to imagine the ripple effect and impact it can have in the public sphere.
Because we take for granted things like air and water, the public land, the private land that we use for sports, which is vital. In many cases, we couldn't be without all of those resources to enjoy sport. You use the word influence now. It is a commonly used phrase, influencing influencers, and sport can play such a huge role in that because of its impact in the world. But talk about the individual responsibility we have here. I'm thinking of examples like the use of plastic and the use of equipment that we take for granted now, but we could do better in contributing to the sustainability of the products that we use.
Absolutely. What's great about this is that there's really an opportunity, whether an individual athlete, a coach, whether you're in a team or community, or whether you're at the national governing body level of sport, everyone has an action they can take. So breaking it down, if we look at the individual level, we can look and see the impacts of climate change on the health of athletes, such as increased rates of asthma, as well as heat-related illnesses. And so we know then that if an individual athlete wants to get active and participate, there are simple things an athlete can do within the context of a team, or just as an individual who's saying, hey, I'm a runner and I want to see what I can do to promote sustainability. So some small steps that I begin to think about are resource allocation and development. So beginning to think about what are the resources being used at the events I attend and how can I mitigate my impact. So for example, I'm a triathlete, and there have been some triathlon races where composting has now become an individual action. So an individual came forward to say, hey, let's have composting, collected compost, and then used those resources to bring it into that local community to go back into the earth. Additionally, we see athletes starting to focus on inclusion. So one thing that I encourage athletes to do alongside their teammates is to see who are the people that my sport is accessible to, and who could we engage to involve in our sport who maybe hasn't had the opportunity. So sometimes on the local level, that's looked like looking at facilities in which there's more access for handicapped individuals to be able to play. There's some organizations such as Special Olympics that's offering the chance to partner unified, they call it unified sports, where you can run or participate in any kind of sport that's being offered with someone who has a different intellectual disability. And so by partnering and training with someone who may be of a different ability level than your own, we start to see more integration of people with different abilities. And we also start to see these athletes step forward into their own self-efficacy as well. I know for me on a personal level, something I've tried with my triathlon training is to be more cognizant of reducing material waste. So when possible, I'm choosing recyclable plastics or creating my own protein bars to reduce actually the waste aspect that can come along with the food and nutritional aspects. But I realize that that may not always be feasible for all. And then gender is a big focus within the Sustainable Development Goals. So right now I'm on a cycling team here in Washington, D.C., and we are working with, on an individual level as athletes on our team, working with our local regional governing body to think about events and outreach for how we can engage more women in sport, since gender equity is a big principle of the Sustainable Development Goals. And so some of that looks like surveying. We've had conversations in our community with, hey, what prevents you? What makes you feel intimidating? What would make this be a more inviting environment? So some of it is also assessing the environment in which the sport exists so that we can make it inclusive for all people.
You mentioned there social awareness, really, the inclusion across sectors, which is, of course, critically important to use a buddy system, which we often see now, to partner with someone that is very diverse or come from a completely different sector, to really embrace this and put your arms around it. And I'm thinking how parents can play a large role in this when they're taking their children to participate in sports. They have a role to play in various aspects of this sustainability and the goals of sustainability.
Absolutely. That's another key stakeholder. I know for me, on a personal level, my father was a great influence, engaging me in physical activity together at a young age. And then through that, you can also incorporate life skills and health education, which are also related to the SDGs and also a form of empowerment that many sport for development programs try to instill. So it's not just sport, but it's also that coupled piece of mentorship that can really hold accountability and foster growth.
And when we talk about sustainability in the environment, of course, we're thinking about global warming and the impact that this is having on our facilities, basically. When you think of the sports that need warm weather and the sports that need cold weather, and of course, with those climate changes comes a change in the weather conditions that impact sport. So many factors impact sport. So, it all comes back to we're completing the same circle, aren't we?
Absolutely. Cold weather sports, Winter Olympics, warm sports, everyone has seen. I was reading an article about case examples of the changes that can be expected. And actually, there was an article, I saw an image on of the Sochi Olympic Games of someone sunning themselves on a 65-degree Fahrenheit day in Russia. And so clearly, climate change is present, and also with increased flooding, that impacts the water quality for water sports like triathlon or open water swimming and surfing. So naturally, yes, there is a strong impact on the climate. And then there's certain teams that have, for example, I was researching about Surfers Against Sewage, which is a UK-based group of surfers who were interested in giving back to their community and mitigating some of the climate change there. And they've chosen to implement some policy level plastic bans to actually incentivize recycling plastic, and then also creating apps for people to understand the water quality of the different surfing areas that were predominant in the part of the UK for surfing. So whether it's land or water athletes and sports, there is a chance to get involved, and also a chance of seeing how there is an effect.
Let's talk about some really precise examples here, Melissa, about the takeaways that we would like our listeners to take from this conversation, of the things that they can do, some real examples on a daily basis that they can contribute towards sustainability goals.
Absolutely. Some of them, I think, are really the intersection of both the individual level actions coupled with community level, and then coupled with governing body level actions. So some of those have looked like creating a sustainability plan and then implementing it. And that's not necessarily an overnight activity, of course, but it could be a long-term solution and vision casting for the sport that's specific to the community. So the questions to consider are, how will you and your team and sport conserve resources to keep athletes engaged in the sport for years to come? And NHL, National Hockey League Green, has done some fantastic work in this area, where it's more of a governing body level approach that trickles down, where they've created and published their annual sustainability report. And that gets very specific, which may not be as applicable for the individual level, but it's tracking CO2 usage in facilities. They're also even tracking employee travel and considering carbon offsets for how they can either plant trees or restore water, purchases of water restoration certificates. Additionally, they're looking at composting in venues. And they're also promoting health and environmental education for the youth, so that they grow up with an awareness and appreciation of the resources being used for their sport. So their sustainability plans could be a model for other governing bodies to take part. On an individual level, it can look like a sustainability plan for a local 5K. So for an example, if you're in a community that has a community 5K every year, a sustainability plan could look like, what types of resources are you procuring? Can we get local produce, at the finish line? Can we compost? Can we encourage use of public transit to get to our venue? And then also, is it accessible for all? Again, can we include people who may not have been included in this race previously, such as people in wheelchairs? And so some of it that I encourage folks to do is think about that sustainability plan, how it could be implemented, and then be able to share it because we all learn from each other. Additionally, I also encourage individual athletes and coaches to mentor women and girls, to empower more women and girls to participate in the benefits of sport. And some of this looks like building up the leadership capacity for females to coach, as girls are often more able to stay in sport if they can see people like them competing throughout the lifespan. Additionally, a more long-term approach would be conducting an assessment to see who in your city or town has access to the sport. Is it people of color? Is it accessible for people who have special needs? And what, could you move to a facility that's more accessible? Or can you modify your existing environment to be near public transit, for example? So that's more of a long-term plan. And then additionally, communities can consider engaging sport as a tool to get conflicting groups engaged with one another. Sometimes in cities and communities, we are siloed from people who may not be of our demographic background. So one example of this is Peace Players International, who operates globally and domestically in the US, in Baltimore and Brooklyn, And they provide youth development programming through basketball in neighborhoods that have escalated rates of crime, or perhaps have had groups of people who haven't interacted with each other previously. On a global level, it looks like ameliorating religious divides in Northern Ireland, and also similar programs in the Middle East and Cyprus, again, using basketball or the sport to build understanding amongst cultural and political division.
There are lots of great examples there, Melissa. And the other thing that we have heard a lot of here at WISP Sports through our friends who are professional sailors and the campaigns that they've been involved with, not least of all Turn the Tide on Plastic, that was skippered by Dee Kafari in the previous edition of the Volvo Ocean Race.
Yes.
And Dee came away with lots of messages there from the campaign that circumnavigated the world, of course, but also since then she's become a speaker worldwide for this because of her role in sport. And the examples that we often see, often she posts and others who have been part of that campaign have taken away real examples of how people can get active to minimize the impact of plastic on our oceans. And we've also seen through our friends that created leggings from recyclable plastic, Olas leggings, which has been another example of how you can recycle plastic, which you can, obviously we want to save it, impacting the oceans, but we can also put it to good use, recycling plastic. That's playing a big part, of course, and people can be mindful of that, whether they're parents or fans of the sport. Whenever they go to a sporting venue, be mindful of the use of plastic and recyclable products.
Absolutely. And then if we have time, as this is a good moment, we can also transition into talking about more of the governing body level actions, but also, again, governing bodies serve individual and community level athletes. So there's chance for this to overlap. So a couple things I just want to mention relate to equal payout in sports. This is actually an issue that's been identified in many sports. Most recently, the IOC did come out with a gender equity toolkit, and I'd be happy to share any of these links in your show notes. And one of the things that they encourage for how we can promote equity in sport, and again, equity in gender is an SDG, Sustainable Development Goal Framework, is equal payout. And so nearly 82% of sports have equal payout, but it's still not universal, especially, being a cyclist, I see this often. There is the UCI for cycling has a one-day road race that pays the male winner nearly 18 times more than the female victor. Sometimes there's still not opportunities for women in sports. And one petition that I got behind was a 2013 Change.org petition started by 4 professional female cyclists and triathletes in response to the Tour de France race director, Christian Prudhomme, swatting the air with his hand when women came to him and said, we want to participate in this sport as the full Tour de France. And so over 96,000 signatures were signed on this Change.org petition by people from all over the world. And I got behind this on an individual level, racing in a jersey that listed the petition, and I had TDF written on my arms, and shared this petition with my team, and also qualified for the World's Half Iron Championships. So tried to take that message globally. There's now been a one-day implementation of a race for women toward the end of the Tour de France, but there's still push to really continue to see this forward. And so governing bodies can really assess how are we doing with gender equity, not only from an equal payout standpoint, but simply equity and parity in terms of play and racing time. And this is where individual athletes can also push toward their local bodies and then national bodies.
There's a lot of takeaways from this, Melissa, and as you say, some links that you will share, some resources that we'll share in the show notes for this episode. So I think there's plenty of food for thought there. about sustainability and how important it is that sport plays a role. So I want to thank you for taking the time to come on the show today and explain that to us, and for sharing the resources that you have with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for the conversation.
Conversations from the world of women's sports. This is Wisp Sports Radio.
You can find a link to Melissa's website and her social media, as well as additional resources on the subject of sustainability in sport, on the website at wispsports.com, where you'll find the show notes for this episode. And whilst you're there, you'll find a link to other episodes of Transcending Sport, where we talk to a wide range of guests from around the world who are playing a role in helping girls and women in sport. You can join in the conversation by following us on social media at Wisp Sports. You can also drop us a line with any comments, questions, or suggestions to info@wispsports.com. And remember that you can download this podcast from any podcast player. Just look for Wisp Sports. Until the next time, I'm Chris Stafford, and thank you for listening and supporting women in sport everywhere.